In this session, I will talk about functions. A Python function has a group of statements designed to perform a job. It's a good way to organize our code into reusable chunks. The reusable chunks of code benefit us if we need to update our code and if we need to reuse the code over and over. We have already seen some functions such as print and input. These two functions are built into Python. However, we can also write our own Python functions. Whenever Python sees def, it knows we are defining a function. Def is short for define, and it is followed by a name. The name is our function. Do you recall the naming convention for a variable? Naming a function has the same convention as a variable. We should always have a descriptive name with lowercase letters. If there is more than one name, more than one word, then we separate each word with an underscore. This function name will be greet underscore the underscore user. Cannot forget the colon, which lets Python know we are getting ready to define a block of code. Therefore, any code lines that comes after this first line will be parts of our function. The first line is the function definition. Automatically, the next line is indented after clicking the enter key. The block of code will be print. I'm going to tab and write hello, how are you? And print. Tab again, and then write this is a Python function tutorial. These two lines represent the body. We know it's the body because they are indented. The next line will be print. Starts at the top. This line is not part of the function because it is not indented. Do you see the line under our function name? Greet the user. Python is showing this line because it wants to add a docstring comment. It's not required, but when I hover over the line, we see missing docstring and insert docstring. Select insert docstring, then write this is a Python function example. A docstring explains the purpose of a function. Now, let's run. The only print statement we see in the console is start at the top. That's because execution in Python always skip over a defined function. The defined function only describes our code. If we want to execute our code, we must invoke the function, also known as calling the function, by writing the function name greet underscore the underscore user. If we think about it, greet the user is also the same as when we call print and input. It has a name and parentheses. However, we have to be careful to replace the function. It's very important. We are not allowed to place the function call before the name of the function. If we place it before the function, we get an error. And the error says unresolved reference. So the best way to place the call is after the function name. Now let's add one more print statement. I'm going to write print stop at the bottom. Now let's run. We see start at the top. Hello, how are you? This is a Python function tutorial. Stop at the bottom. Let's walk through the process flow. Like the last execution, our code lines 6 and 7 were not executed within the function. Our program started at line 9 and stopped at line 11. Line 9 says start at the top. Then Python executes line 10, which is the function called greet the user. The program jumps up to the first line in the function, then begin executing the block of code for both print statements. When the program finishes executing the function, then execution return to line 10 that called the function. Finally, the program moves to line 11, stop at the bottom. The print statements within the function were only executed when we called the function at line 10. That's it for functions in Python. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video. In this session, we are going to talk about Python parameters and arguments. Sometimes an engineer may call a parameter an argument and call an argument a parameter. However, there is a difference between parameters and arguments. A parameter is a variable that stores information so a function can perform its job. An argument is also information, but is passed to the parameter when calling the function. Let's use the same example from our last session. What is the difference between Python's built-in print function and our define greet the user function? The built-in Python function for print contains information, and greet the user does not contain information. Let's investigate the print function. Do you see the values within the parentheses? Those are called parameters. We are going to create our own parameter. The information in green is the docstring comment. If you look at the file name, we see built-ins.py because this complete file contains a list of Python functions. If I search for input, we see that input is also here and it has parameters. Now let's go back to our file, and we're going to create our own parameters and arguments. Notice all of the print statements have data within the quotes. Hello, how are you? This is a Python function tutorial. Start at the top, stop at the bottom. These are the arguments that get passed to the print function. So now with our parameter, we're going to write name between the parentheses. The purpose of the name parameter is to operate as a placeholder so it can receive information. Recall an argument is passed to the parameter. We pass information to the parameter from our function called greet the user. James will be the name we pass. After our function receives the name value, we can print James by formatting the name. Place an F before the single quotes, then curly brackets before the comma. Now, this is how we format the name. All we do is place name between each curly bracket. Do you notice that F has a brown background? That's because this Python version does not support the F prefix. It's okay. It won't cause an error. So we're going to continue. And our print statement now says, hello name, how are you? Let's run. and we see the name James was printed to the console. You see how we use the print statement 4 times? 1, 2, 3, 4. If we wanted to, we could also print greet the user more than 1 time, and it would print a different value to the console. Print, and we see James and John. I'm going to remove John. And in the same way, how the print function had more than 1 value for a parameter, we can also add more than 1 parameter to our greet the user function by separating name with the comma and write age as the other parameter. Now, let's add one more print statement for age by writing print, and within this, we're going to write another tab, RU plus age. And we're going to put years old. Let's pass in 34 as the value. Now, let's run. And we see both values in the console, James and 34. At this point, we can reuse the function over and over. That's it for Python parameters and arguments. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next session. In this session, we're going to focus on default values for Python. It allows us to define a function with a default value for each parameter. We are required to have an argument if the function has a parameter, unless we have a default value. Right now, we have 2 parameters, name and age, with 2 arguments, James and 34. If I remove age, 34 as the argument, the parenthesis has a brown background with the note that says parameter age unfulfilled. It will not be a problem when adding a default value to the age parameter. Age equals 38, and the brown background goes away. Our program will use the default value when we do not provide an argument. Run, and the console shows, are you 38 years old? The program provides a warning message if we use the same default value and argument value. For example, if I write name equals James, the argument has a line that says argument equals to the default parameter value. It's just a warning, so if I run this program, it will not show an error. Look what happens when I add 34 back as the argument, then remove the default value, age equals 38. We see an error for the parameter, and it says non-default parameter follows default parameter. To fix this problem, age must have a default value if name has a default value. We are not allowed to have a parameter without a default value following a parameter with a default value. However, it's not a problem if I make age equals 38, then remove name equals James. Run, and the console shows James as the name and 34 as the age. The program uses our argument value. When we have an argument and default value, that's why we see 34 and not 38. Let's add John as the default value, then remove both arguments. Notice we do not have an error. Run, and the console shows both arguments. They show both default values, John and 38. Yeah. That's it for default values for Python. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next session. In this session, we are going to look at two Python concepts, positional arguments and keyword arguments. A positional argument depends on the parameter order. Each argument must be in the same position as the parameter. The keyword argument happens when we pass a name and a value pair to a function. Starting with the positional arguments, let's remove these default values, John and 38. Then add back one more argument. The name argument will be Jane. From the last session with default values, we know this is a problem because there is an age parameter, but no age argument. If we do not want to include an age argument, then we must include a default value. Let's run, and the console shows missing one required positional argument, age. Another problem is how we sort our arguments. In order, the parameters are name, then age. So our arguments should also have name before age. But if I write 18 before Jane, then the console will swap the values when I run. We see, hello 18, are you Jane? That's not right. So for positional arguments, our program expects the arguments to be in the same position as the parameters. However, the position does not matter if we use keyword arguments, because a keyword argument is based on the key and value. The key is the name of the parameter. Age is the parameter, so that will be our key. Also, name is the parameter, so it will be our key. The values are 18 and Jane. Now, when I run this time, the console shows, hello Jane, are you 18? Make sure the key is spelled just like the parameter. If I misspell name and have the arguments for the argument, we see it's a problem. When I hover, we see unexpected arguments. It does not recognize NAM. Let me show you one more thing. We would not on purpose misspell name and have the arguments out of order, not on purpose. So when I do this here, by putting it in the correct order, name before age, and adding back the E, there is not a problem. But watch what happens when 18 is by itself as a positional argument after removing age equals the key. The error says positional arguments after keyword arguments. On the other hand, it's not a problem if the second argument is a keyword argument and the first argument is a positional argument. Just remove name equals. There is no error, but now I'm going to add back age equals, and it's not a problem when the keyword value is the second argument. Now when I run, there is no error and the console shows each value in the correct place. Hello Jane, are you 18? That's it for Python positional arguments and keyword arguments. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next session. In this tutorial session, we're going to focus on returning a value from a function. A defined function can process information, then send back a value to the calling function. The value is sent back using a return statement, and the value is called a return value. First step is to create a defined function with the name like add_numbers. At this point, Python allows us to set the amount of parameters for our function. The purpose is to provide how many values to send to this add_numbers function. Our parameter will be number. We're going to add number plus number. Now, when it comes to this function, it will be adding a number by itself, number plus number. Now, let's call the add numbers function, then pass in 5 as the argument. Also, print the value. When we run, the console shows none. None is a reserved keyword that serves as the absence of a value. We see none because our defined function does not have a return keyword before number plus number. This line is a return statement which consists of a return keyword and a value or expression. Number plus number is an expression that will be returned to the calling function. Let's execute, and this time we see 10 in the console. The reserved keyword also shows up if we forget to add a value or an expression. Remove number plus number, then run. We see none again in the console. Like the parameters and arguments tutorial session, we can also use our defined function to accept more than one parameter. The parameters will be number 1 and number 2. Let's also add total equals number 1 plus number 2. Battery running low. Let's return a value and not an expression. The value will be total. Now, when we run, we're going to call this number 1 parameter and number 2 parameter, but we're going to leave 5 as the number 1 argument and 10 for the number 2 parameter, and 10 will be the argument. We must be careful to not generate unreachable code with a return statement. Unreachable code is also called dead code because the program will never execute that code. After the return statement, we write print. The total is, then run. All we see is 15. Hover this print statement, and it says this code is unreachable. Move the print statement before the return statement, then run. The console shows the total is 15, but 15 is on a separate line. Let me show you how to print 15 on the same line using a keyword argument. Do you recall in one of the previous sessions when we investigated the print function, built-in print function? Okay, so it has parameters as SCP and END, end. The docstring comment shows SCP is a string inserted between the values, default a space. If we insert a comma, then a comma will be inserted between each value. However, END is a string appended after the last value. Default a new line. Let's go back to our program. Then add a comma, END equals empty quotes, empty value. This will no longer insert a new line. One more concept I want to show you. Right now, we are calling the function with print add numbers. If you want to, you can store the return value by writing a variable like result equals add numbers 5, 10. We would get 15 from the defined by adding 10 plus 5. Next, the total 15 is returned to add numbers 5, 10. Now, when we store the result into a variable, let's print the result. Execute. The total is 15 on the same line. That's it for Python, return values and statements. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next session.